This comparative study will examine the way genre theory can be applied to Blade Runner and Ghost in the Shell, and I will analyze how they follow and also subvert genre conventions. I decided to focus on the cyberpunk genre as it is one of the key subgenres of science fiction and has spawned many classics such as Blade Runner, The Matrix Trilogy, Ghost in the Shell, and Akira. The aesthetics of the worlds depicted in cyberpunk originate from Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and the novel Neuromancer by William Gibson, which show high-tech low-life and a classic 80s neon theme. A cyberpunk world is controlled by megacorporations and advanced AI technology. Cyberpunk originated in the 1980s as a rebellion to the status quo of the 80s. It's about the people and how their surroundings are affected by technology outpacing morality. Cyberpunk films critique capitalism and often aim to highlight the possible dangers that rapid technological advancements may bring with them. The reason cyberpunk has seen a resurgence recently is because the modern world we live in is a cyberpunk dystopia, a world in which companies such as Disney and Amazon are monopolizing their competition, and which in recent years has seen the discussion about the possible dangers of AI technology heating up as more of our daily lives are controlled by technology. My justification for studying these two films is as follows. Blade Runner is considered one of the most influential and critically acclaimed cyberpunk and science fiction films ever made. Pulitzer Prize winning movie critic Roger Ebert said that it is a tribute to the influence and reach of Blade Runner, that 25 years after its release, virtually everyone reading this knows about Replicants, showing the influence of this film on not only cyberpunk but film in general. Blade Runner's critical acclaim paved the way for many more cyberpunk films to be successful, such as Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell is like Blade Runner, a critically acclaimed film. In his book Animated Films, author James Clark states that Ghost in the Shell is a touchstone anime and certainly considered by many to be a masterpiece. Ghost in the Shell, adapted from the Japanese manga of the same name, is seen as one of the movies that started the Japanese boom in the West. Blade Runner was released in 1982. During this time, the narrative regarding the economic and political system of America had shifted compared to the 50s and 60s. Back then, the notion was that big businesses and trade groups supported ideas to guarantee workers' pensions and improve workplace safety. This changed in the 70s and 80s. The feeling of being obligated to support workers was replaced by that of believing that it was important for one to only look out for their own interests. As Gordon Gekko, infamous villain of the 1987 film Wall Street, put it, greed is good. The sense of everyone looking out for themselves led to an increase in the gap between rich and poor Americans. The film reflects this in several ways, one of which being the flying airship advertising a better life on off-world colonies, a life that only the rich can afford, while the poor are left stranded in the overcrowded city of Los Angeles. In the late 1980s, the Japanese economy boomed, driven by exuberance in the equities markets and skyrocketing real estate prices. Japan was beginning to outpace America technology-wise, and it boasted some of the world's largest banks and corporations. Tokyo was filling up with skyscrapers, and Sony, a tech company, quickly became one of the biggest companies in the world, exporting $1 billion worth of goods by the mid-1990s. Technology was heavily invested in by Japan, as they bought 3 times more technological information from America than America did from Japan. The public perception of this was that it was a good thing, however some people became wary of the dangers technology may have to society. Ghost in the Shell represents the fears of technology by having the main villain, the Puppet Master, be an AI program with hacking abilities, while Megatech Body, the massive corporation controlling Tokyo in Ghost in the Shell, highlights how big companies like Sony were able to control the society, showing the negative sides of capitalism just like Blade Runner. To analyze how these films follow and subvert cyberpunk conventions, I first must establish the conventions of cyberpunk. To do this, I will use Rick Altman's semantics and synthetics genre theory. With this theory, Altman believes that you will gain a deeper understanding of genre theory and the film. Semantics relates to the primary linguistic meaning of a text component part, while synthetics are the secondary or textual meaning that those parts acquire through a structuring process internal to the text or to the genre. Applying this to the cyberpunk genre, the typical conventions of cyberpunk are as follows. For semantics, a typical cyberpunk film would include megacorporations controlling large portions of the world, high-tech low-life, a dystopian future Earth, flying cars, neon billboards, crime, low-key lighting, and a neo-noir style. The typical syntax of a cyberpunk genre would include a critique on capitalism and corporate greed in the world, and a fear of the technological impact on human life. Blade Runner is set in the near future of 2019 LA. The city has turned into a dystopia. In Blade Runner, the city works to instill a pervasive sense of alienation and loss, and to shape and define the motivations of the characters that live there. The city's mise-en-scène is tall skyscrapers, massive billboards, neon signs, and flying cars, yet the wide shots and extreme wide shots of the city are used to portray the characters' loneliness and contrast with the busy setting of the city. The divide between the rich and poor is bigger than ever, which is shown by the fact that even though the society is so technically advanced, it seems to consist primarily of a dark underworld. This is further exemplified by the low-angle shot of the earlier mentioned airship advertising off-world colonies. The low-angle shot shows the audience that the people in this city can only look up to the spaceship and only dream of leaving Earth. Within the film, the replicants function as a cipher for decoding the Marxist critique of hyper-industrialized Los Angeles to reveal the divine menace that is lurking beneath the dire economic wasteland. The replicants are artificial people created by men, used for slave labor who only live for 4 years. The protagonist, Deckard, is charged with hunting down 5 escaped replicants and killing them. However, as the film continues, we are left wondering whether to root against the replicants or feel sorry for them, as their shortened lifespan, plus the fact that some replicants don't even know that they are replicants, evokes sympathy in the audience. Blade Runner acts as a critique on capitalism, portraying mankind's and the United States' bleak trajectory by depicting a platonic dystopian world taken over by a megacorporation in which inequality has never been higher, whether that be between the elite and the lower class, or mankind and the replicants. This links back to the context of the film, as the gap between the rich and poor was increasing in the 70s and 80s. Ghost in the Shell shares some of these conventions. Its dystopian vision of an alienated near-future world, shadowy government agencies, and a dark urban setting of rain-lashed skyscrapers all evoke Blade Runner. Its world is controlled by a megacorporation. However, I would argue that its depiction of its world is less dystopian than other cyberpunk films like Blade Runner. Blade Runner sees no sunlight throughout its duration, which contrasts vastly with the sunlight-rich Tokyo that Ghost in the Shell depicts. Thus, Ghost in the Shell subverts typical conventions of the genre. Ghost in the Shell is an unconventional cyberpunk setting, told from the perspective of characters who would usually be the antagonist but are now seen as a protagonist. Motoko, Ghost in the Shell's protagonist, has had her soul, or ghost, transferred into a robot, making her a cyborg. The Puppet Master was created by Dr. Willis, but after it became self-aware, it was ordered to be destroyed. Both films ponder the question, what is life anyway? Motoko starts doubting whether her ghost is real, and similarly in Blade Runner, Rachel, Deckard's love interest, is a replicant but doesn't notice herself. She has been given the memories of someone else. Both characters start questioning whether they are alive, however both movies depict them as human. We can also compare the two films through its neo-noir elements. Many cyberpunk films are influenced by film noir, making them neo-noir. Visually, film noirs tend to use low-key lighting schemes and stark contrast between light and dark. In this scene from Blade Runner, Deckard is lit low-key, however the light coming in through the windows throughout the scene contrasts with this and the dark building. This lighting makes this final showdown between Deckard and Roy Batty, the movie's antagonist, more dramatic, but also mysterious. The audience feels what Deckard is feeling as he is being chased down by Roy through the entire building. This low-key lighting is typical of cyberpunk films and the neo-noir styles these movies adapt, as mentioned previously. Comparing this with the lighting in Ghost in the Shell, we can see this style again. The stark contrast between light and dark spaces is prevalent in this scene, where the only well-lit parts are the ones where the action is happening, giving the rest of the space a dark, enigmatic tone. Before the showdown, the character of Motoko is also low-key lit, just like Deckard, as she is infiltrating this building. This lighting also adds to the dystopian theme concurrent in cyberpunk movies, as it makes it seem that there's little artificial lighting in the criminal hideouts. However, Ghost in the Shell, unlike Blade Runner, does not keep this style throughout its entire duration, as it involves scenes in which there is high-key lighting. Like in this scene, where Motoko and a partner try to catch a criminal out in the daylight, it is unusual for cyberpunk films to have this high-key lighting in their films, as typically the lighting scheme of these movies is a dark world, only really lit by neon signs. This shows again how Ghost in the Shell subverts certain cyberpunk styles, whereas Blade Runner seems to follow the typical conventions of this genre. Another neo-noir element utilized in both films is the use of a femme fatale character. According to Merriam-Webster dictionary, a femme fatale is a seductive woman who lures men into dangerous or compromising situations. In Blade Runner, Zora is portrayed as the femme fatale. Zora used her charm to infiltrate the home of J.F. Sebastian, the designer of the newest set of replicants that includes Zora. She befriends him when all she wants out of him is information. Zora used her charm to lure people like J.F. Sebastian into deathly traps as seen in this two-shot, which is typical of a femme fatale. In Ghost in the Shell, I would argue that Motoko is the protagonist as well as the femme fatale. As previously stated, the protagonist in this film would be antagonist in most other cyberpunk movies. Motoko has the typical traits of a femme fatale, however these are shown through a heroic lens. Her wardrobe, as seen in this shot, was fully naked, which is typical of how a femme fatale's body is used as a distraction to lure male characters into traps. However, it is unusual for a femme fatale to be naked, again showing how Ghost in the Shell differs from Blade Runner and how it subverts conventions of the genre. Where Motoko may not use seduction as much, she is shown to be a fearless character who in the end gets her way, unlike Zora from Blade Runner. In conclusion, Blade Runner follows more typical cyberpunk conventions, whereas Ghost in the Shell subverts these conventions more. Both films are set in a near-future world controlled by a megacorporation, which shows high-tech low life. However, they differ in how exactly they portray this world. Blade Runner portrays its world in a more typical dark setting, with little to no natural lighting, whereas Ghost in the Shell subverts these conventions and shows a sunlight-rich Tokyo. Both films depict artificial life. Blade Runner does this through its replicants, and Ghost in the Shell through the cyborgs living in the world. Blade Runner acts as more of a critique on capitalism compared to Ghost in the Shell's commentary about technology. However, both films show these ideas through the effect capitalism or technology has on its society. Both films also adopt a neo-noir style, such as low-key lighting and a femme fatale character. However, Blade Runner shows this character through a villainous lens, contrasting with Ghost in the Shell's heroic depiction of its femme fatale character, again showing how Ghost in the Shell subverts typical conventions of the genre.